I want to bring Brandon Johnson to the front of the congregation. And the reason that I want to bring Brandon Johnson to the front of the congregation today specifically, thank you, sister. I see you, baby. The reason why I want to bring Brandon Johnson to the front of the congregation is because I've developed an affinity for Chicago. Through all of my holding Chicago accountable, I've developed an affinity for Chicago. And the reason that I have is because when I seen the people giving those passionate speeches to their legislators and their elected leaders yesterday, it kind of touched me. I thought about that junk as I was going to sleep last night after I got off the panel. It kind of touched me because I was just thinking to myself, like, all of these people is not signing up for this. Even if they did vote for Brandon Johnson or whoever their alderman is, this is not what they was expecting. You know, sometimes we get finessed, even by the people that tell us what they're going to do, but then we didn't know how they were going to implement it, or we didn't know that they was going to be allocating all of the monies that you guys are spending in Chicago, right? And even when they do it and it sounds good and they say stuff like, well, we're going to fix homelessness or we're going to speak to homelessness. It sounds good. And the reason why I have these conversations with the people on the Millionaire Morning Show is because you guys need to start looking into the policies. The policies actually tell you how they plan to implement their plan. So if they say, okay, well, we're going to solve for homelessness, well, you didn't know that you was going to have to pay more in taxes as a result of it. He said that he was going to implement the policy, but he said that you were going to have to pay for it. Shout out to Evolved CA. And that's the difference, right? They didn't tell you that they was going to raise y'all property taxes. They didn't tell y'all that they was going to be taxing people whose property appreciated over 1 million. So even when you thought that you were winning because, oh my God, my property appreciated in Chicago and it went over this amount, you didn't know that you was going to have to give even more money to the city so that they can then be able to not only support the migrant crisis, but also solve for their proposed talking points on the trail. Recently in Chicago, and a lot of people don't even realize it, recently in Chicago, people in Chicago not familiar with it, they tried to implement a new policy in which they tried to sell y'all on the idea of, I'm going to solve for homelessness. No need me explaining it to you. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you for yourself. Make sure you hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. This is what they were proposing, and this is how they sold it to y'all.
Supporters of the Bring Home Chicago, our Bring Chicago Home ordinance, held a rally today to drum up support for the referendum.
And so on today, we're asking Chicago to get ready to vote for the future. A future where children are not sleeping on trains. A future where parents are not having to struggle whether or not they have to pick up their clothes and move from a shelter and wake up in places that they do not know.
Chicago Home is another one of Mayor Johnson's campaign promises. On the March 19th primary ballot, voters will be asked to approve an increase to the real estate transfer tax on sales of property worth over $1 million. The money would be used to finance a $100 million fund to reduce homelessness and increase affordable housing. Critics call it a tax on the rich and say it will hurt Chicago's real estate market.
So the way that they sold this to y'all is by saying, listen, we're going to eat the rich. We're going to eat the rich. And so what they're basically saying is that, because let's be clear, if you have a property that's valued over $1 million, it doesn't mean that you're rich, because the equity into the property is the thing that substantiates your net worth. We've already seen this exact same playbook out in California. Let me say it again for the people in the back. We've seen this exact same playbook out in California. What did it create? Chicago is doing the exact same thing that California started doing 25 years ago. They're overtaxing their residents. They're running out the businesses. They're going to create an environment where you can't even live, work, and play in there. And then ultimately, it's the people in the middle class that's going to suffer the most, because you guys are going to have to pick up the tab for the thing that they already committed to. Now, instead of them saying, listen, we need to figure out how we manage the resources that we already have in order to make sure, and I don't have a dog in the fight, so I'm not impacted. So I'm speaking objectively, and I'm telling you honestly what's really happening. Instead of them saying, listen, We need to manage our resources effectively so we don't run out businesses and run out people that's actually spending the most money, adding into the coffers. Because if you look at what's going on in California, more than half of everything that goes into California's treasury comes from people that is above the top 1%. And so when those people say, okay, well, we just gonna go ahead and leave because we're not gonna keep getting finessed by you, then what happens? You start to have a deficit. They don't lower how much they're allocating towards whatever it is that they're allocating towards social services. It doesn't actually solve for the problem, but it makes the people more dependent because there's no long-term solution for how you get people to not be homeless. You can't just give them a home. You have to give people opportunities. You have to give them the ability to work. You have to educate them. You have to give them better schools. You have to give them police presence to have people be safe. You have to incentivize people to be able to do what they need to do, not try to solve for the problem by giving people a fish. You have to teach them to fish, not give them a fish. You have to give them an opportunity to get themselves out of it, but then you have to give them a limit, parameters, and then solve for the crisis that way. You do not do that by overtaxing. It does not work. We've seen it happen. It's happened all over the West Coast, and they literally tapping into emergency funds, and they have the biggest coffers over there in California, yet people continue to vote them in office. Well, the people push back, and the legal system push back. Check it out.
Chicagoans going to vote early will find one item on the ballot that may never be counted. Friday, a judge ruled the so-called Bring Chicago Home referendum invalid. CBS 2 political reporter Chris Ty in the newsroom for us. And Chris, a late development today looking to change the judge's decision.
That's right, Joe. Late this afternoon, the city filed an appeal to reverse the judge's order. So on one side, you have the mayor and his effort to raise $100 million to help fight homelessness. On the other, a group of building owners and managers.
Shout out to Diane, and welcome to the greatest morning show on earth, and welcome to the greatest people on earth. I just want to let you know, Diane, because this is your first time here, chat lives do matter. So I do interact with the audience, and the audience interacts with each other. So what you say in the chat, we do recognize it. Shout out to you and welcome to the family.
This tax hike on big-ticket real estate deals will further damage the city's real estate market. And in the middle, the language used on the ballot that may have torpedoed it before a single vote was counted.
We can bring Chicago home. My family is living proof.
On day one as mayor, he made it a goal. But Mayor Johnson's $100 million effort to fight homelessness getting tripped up on the goal line. 3 weeks from Election Day.
I mean, of course. I mean, I was disappointed.
The mayor talking disappointment and strategy. Late Monday, his team appealing Friday's ruling by a Cook County judge that stops the Bring Chicago Home effort dead in its tracks. If passed, it would raise the transfer tax on homes like this one on the market in the Gold Coast for $1 million. But 93% of Chicago homes would see a decrease in their transfer tax. Doing two things at once like that is called log rolling, and critics of the program argue that's unfair.
And I think it's an unhealthy precedent when judges make a decision to not allow the people of Chicago to cast their votes.
Opponents of Johnson's plan, Chicago's Building Owners and Management Association, say it would hurt an already struggling real estate market. But in the end, it's the language used on the ballot that may be its undoing.
If the mayor really does want to push this progressive agenda, he needs to be more careful about the basic ins and outs of how to pass legislation.
All this back and forth as voters in Chicago already early voting on it. What happens to the votes for a referendum that's future is in flux?
Votes will be taken, but not counted in the March 19th primary. Those presumably records will be retained. And if the judge's ruling is reversed, those votes would be there to be counted.
The city's appeal today may just be one of the efforts to undo Friday's ruling by the judge against the mayor's plan. Tomorrow, the city's Board of Elections meet. They are named in this filing. They could appeal, too, on different grounds. And what is unclear in all of this is exactly what issue the judge has with the argument. That could be crucial in how this all plays out. By the way, Election Day, 3 weeks from tomorrow. Live in the newsroom.
New at 4, a new push to keep a controversial referendum on Chicago's ballots. It's known as Bring Chicago Home, a measure that would help Chicago's homeless problem by increasing taxes on million-dollar home sales.
It was dealt a major setback last Friday when a judge said it should not be on the ballot. CBS 2 political reporter Chris Ty is in our newsroom. And Chris, I understand you've got some new information.
That's right, Jim and Marie. Within the last hour, the city of Chicago filed its appeal to reverse Friday's ruling by that judge that you just mentioned. This all hinges on the so-called transfer tax, that one-time tax people pay when property is sold. Mayor Johnson's plan is to raise that tax on homes valued at over $1 million. Properties, rather, valued at over $1 million, but the tax would go down for 93% of homes in Chicago. Some people say that's considered log rolling, where you attach a negative issue with a positive issue and you ask voters to vote on it, and that is what's really at play here today. The judge.
So here's the thing. Let me tell you what they then depend on. They depend on the majority to shoot themselves in the foot. Because they know that the majority of people, and it's not just log rolling, it's a finesse, right? Because the way that they get you to vote for this is then they say, well, listen, yours is going to go down by an insignificant amount to where you're not even going to notice the difference, but the people that's going to suffer the most is the rich people. We going to eat the rich. That's how they sell it to the people. That's how they get y'all to vote against y'all jobs. That's how they get y'all to remove businesses in y'all city. That's how they get y'all to ultimately vote on something instead of forcing them. Now, here's the thing. Let me tell you how this would be an easier sell. This would be a much easier sell if a couple different things. Number one, we knew for a fact, well, not even we, Chicagoans knew for a fact that the money would forever actually go towards homelessness, and that there was a path forward so that people don't remain on the system forever. How many people do we know that's on Section 8 for the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, for the rest of their life? How many people do we know that's on Section 8 vouchers for their entire lives? That's number one. Number two, it doesn't actually give people more opportunities. What it does is it puts a forever tax on the citizens. Number three, if they also seen you were doing something productive with the monies that you already have, Chicago's annual budget, let me pull up Chicago's budget. The city of Chicago's total budget, according to chicago.gov, is $16.77 billion every single year. Let me say that again. Chicago's budget is $16.77 billion every single year. They've just approved a $16.6 billion. What do we also know? We also know that one of the things that's continuing to grow inside of Chicago is the amount of money that they're spending on migrants. Well, what do you mean, Anton? Well, let me tell you. I've done shows on this, and so I'm not just reacting to a news segment. I'm telling you something that I already know. I've done shows on this. They were spending over $30 million a month. Let me say that again. $30 million a month on migrant services, meaning things that are tied to migrants, and they didn't even fully capture the amount of money that they were spending because it doesn't account for all of the services that they're already taking away from citizens that's in Chicago. Police services, healthcare coverage, schools, transportation, setting up tent cities, ongoing maintenance, emergency services, cell phones and Obamacare, right? They were spending the equivalent of over $360 million and growing and have no plans to scale back in Chicago. So how can you then justify taking people to the bank and taxing them more instead of saying that we're going to manage the resources that we already have more effectively. You gave all of the money that you had, and then you set the city into a deficit before you ever even decided that you wanted to have this conversation in the first place. Yet they will pitch this to you as though they're managing the budget effectively, when in reality, any business that was operating like this in the public, because politicians have the autonomy to be able to operate like they don't know what's going on, because they basically have an unlimited amount of funds that they always gonna have, and they don't have to actually sell you a product. And this is the reason why you actually have people that understand things ethically, morally. You also got to understand the legislative process, what people need in order to be able to thrive, and have great business acumen in order to have a true public servant that has the right mentality and the right heart to do the thing that's in the interest of the people. Because any business, you've seen Macy's. We've seen Macy's just say that they're closing 150 stores. You know why? Because the people are not buying the products, and so they can't just dip into the coffers and get more money. But when these governments and these legislative branches in these cities, they start to have a shortfall or a budget deficit, they say, okay, well, we just gonna raise the taxes on you. That's not how you manage something effectively. I can't manage my household like that. I can't just say, oh, you know what? We want another penthouse, so we're going to raise the prices on the people. That's not how you manage effectively. What you do is you have investments. See, what they really need to start looking into is how a lot of these colleges and how these businesses operate. For example, they have endowments. They have money that is invested in order to ensure that they keep tuition lower than it would be had they not had these endowments or people that is donating to, that see the value in whatever their education is, that becomes a part of the city fabric. You then raise taxes by being able to create more businesses. Not raising taxes on the people, but raising the ability to be able to raise money that goes into the coffers by allowing for people to thrive in their businesses. You then raise the police budget and give them more ability to be able to police more effectively, and raise their salaries by creating a more conducive environment for people to be able to exist in. That's how you create a business sector or a business environment that then thrives. And then you don't raise the budget based off of hiring more or taxing more for the city itself. You lower the amount of money that you spend on taxes and the people, which then incentivizes the city to thrive even more. More is less. More is less. And so they don't understand this. They just gonna keep taxing y'all. They're gonna keep going into the coffers. They're gonna keep on raising money until they destroy the city. And then ultimately what's going to happen, and watch, over the next 2 to 3 years, you're gonna see some of your favorite cities start to figure out whether or not they want to declare for bankruptcy, because they can't sustain this. This is a failing business model. It's the reason why they're trying to get Shang out of there in Oakland, because the city is failing. Dalton, $7 million in a hole, and they're a small city. This is an unsustainable business practice, but neither here nor there. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking.